I used to be a senior state archaeologist for the California State Parks in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. One of the many state parks I worked in was Angel Island State Park, home of the U.S. Army's former installations known as Camp Reynolds, which was utilized from 1863 to about 1900, and Fort McDowell, utilized from 1900 to 1946. Over the years, numerous military artifacts have been found on Angel Island, one which was a dog tag that once belonged to a man by the name of Walter Sivola. Let me tell you a story about Walter Sivola and his dog tags. I'm going to tell it in two parts. This is part one. Born in Perho, Finland in 1910, Walter Sivola immigrated to the U.S. along with his parents and his older brother when he was still an infant. This was during the difficult time of Russification, a form of cultural assimilation whereby non-Russian communities, voluntarily or not, gave up their culture and language in favor of the Russian one. Many in Finland resisted Russification. Perhaps as a result, Sivola's family moved to the town of Phelps, Wisconsin. According to the 1920 census, Walter's father, Emil Sivola, was employed as a laborer in the logging industry. Walter Sivola joined the Wisconsin National Guard in December of 1939. The following October, the Guard was activated for national service. Sivola soon found himself in the 32nd Division, which was comprised of National Guard units from both Wisconsin and Michigan. The former 32nd Wisconsin National Guard, Red Arrow Division, had fought in France during World War I. When activated for national service, the 32nd had 11,600 soldiers under the command of Major General Irving Fish. The division was sent to Camp Beauregard, Louisiana, for training. Unfortunately, the camp was poorly suited for so many men, and the soldiers began to call it Camp Disregard. In February 1941, the division moved to Camp Livingston, Louisiana. In October of 1941, the 192nd Tank Battalion, which included the 32nd Division Tank Company, later to be known as Company A of the 192nd, was moved by rail to San Francisco and then on by ship to the Philippines. Once in San Francisco, the men were processed through the port of embarkation, which included Fort McDowell. I suspect that Sivola passed through Angel Island at that time. Upon arriving on Luzon, the 192nd Tank Battalion became the Provisional Tank Group. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese forces attacked Allied forces in the Philippines. Company A of the 192nd Tank Battalion engaged the Japanese troops as they came ashore on Luzon and fought rearguard actions and rendered assistance in covering the eventual retreat of Allied forces to Bataan. When Bataan fell in April 1942, the surviving members of Company A, 192nd Tank Battalion, were taken prisoner and participated in the infamous Bataan Death March. When the prisoners were liberated 3 years later, only 35 men remained of the 114 officers and men who had entered national service 5 years earlier. Sivola was already in the Philippines when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. At the time, he was a private first class with the Quartermaster's Corps. Military records indicate that PFC Sivola was among General Jonathan Wainwright's forces surrendered at Corregidor. Following their surrender, the 11,000 American and Filipino POWs were assembled en masse at the 92nd Garage at South Dock, and they remained there for a week under grueling conditions. There was no available shade and precious little water. The 7,000 American POWs were segregated from the 4,000 Filipinos. The week spent at the 92nd Garage was but the beginning of the unspeakable horrors and deprivation that awaited them. The POWs were then taken by their Japanese captors across Manila Bay to the city of Manila and paraded through the city streets. Afterwards, they were taken by train to Cabanatuan Prison. In December 1942, Sivola was moved from Cabanatuan to the Las Piñas POW camp, south of Manila. At Las Piñas, Sivola and several hundred other POWs were put to work building an airfield for the Japanese. At the time Sivola was transferred to Las Piñas, Cabanatuan was so ripe with disease that the transfer may have helped save his life. Cabanatuan was a death camp compared to Las Piñas. Within a year, Sivola and 1,600 other POWs were loaded into the hot and crowded holds of the Nissho Maru, one of Japan's so-called hell ships. The 420-foot-long ship was a rusty tanker that barely looked seaworthy. The POWs were to be transported to Japan, where they would be used as slave laborers. The POWs were crammed at gunpoint into the ship's claustrophobic holds and confined there for what would prove to be an 18-day ordeal testing their ability to survive. Along the way, their convoy was attacked in the South China Sea by a group of 3 American submarines known as Whitaker's Wolves. Unlike all other combatants in World War II, Japan refused to mark their POW transports as such, so American servicemen never knew if they were Allied prisoners aboard the ships when they attacked. Although Sivola's ship survived the American attack, he and the other POWs heard the terrorizing sounds of the battle and listened in horror as a gasoline-carrying tanker was hit by torpedoes and blew up immediately beside them. The horrifying account of the 18 days Sivola and the other POWs endured above the Nissho Maru was recalled by Andrew Aquila in an article by David Aquila entitled A Deeper Level of Hell. Andrew was a 26-year-old from Cleveland and a private with the 192nd Tank Battalion. He took part in the fighting at Luzon, survived the Bataan Death March, his initial confinement at the disease-ridden Camp O'Donnell, and then at Cabatuan, where he almost died of disease, before being shipped off to Japan. Aquila was one of the lucky ones, though. He survived the war and lived to be 93. He's buried at the San Fernando Mission Cemetery near Los Angeles. Once in Japan, Sivola was held at the Osaka main camp in Chico on the Osaka waterfront, where he was forced to work on the docks unloading ships and trains. The Osaka main camp was destroyed by American bombers on June 1, 1945, after which the American POWs were moved to the Samari camp. When the new camp was deemed unsafe, Sivola and the other POWs were moved once again, this time to the Kita Fusazaki camp. The Osaka POW camps were liberated by American forces in September of 1945. Following their liberation, Sivola and the other POWs in the Osaka region were transferred to the docks at the port of Yokohama. That is where they boarded American ships for transport home. The POWs first went to Manila, where they received medical care in preparation for returning to the U.S. One group of liberated POWs boarded the USS Tryon in Yokohama and headed to Manila. Once there, they were transferred to the 29th Replacement Depot in Alabang, located 18 miles south of Manila. Sivola was sent to the 29th Replacement Depot too, and it's likely that he was aboard the USS Tryon for the journey. Interestingly, Clell Edward Linhart, the subject of my last podcast, was a cook first class aboard the USS Tryon. Clell's U.S. Navy Reserve dog tag was found by a friend of mine on Glass Beach in Fort Bragg, California, in the mid-1970s. In my recent podcast, I told the story of Clell's dog tag and how I think it came to be on Glass Beach. How exciting to think that he cooked the first real food that Walter Sivola ate after he was liberated. While at Alabang, Sivola received medical treatment and was fattened up and made presentable for his return home. Following his rehabilitation, Sivola boarded the USS Tryon for the 3-week voyage to San Francisco. From San Francisco, he then made his way home to Phelps. In June 1946, Walter Sivola re-enlisted in the regular army at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, with the rank of corporal. His Army serial number indicates that he had mustered out of the Army less than 3 months earlier, after having served with the 32nd Division from 1939 to 1946. Following his re-enlistment, Corporal Sivola was once again assigned to the Quartermaster Corps. He married his first wife just a few weeks after re-enlisting. According to his family, Sivola saw action in Korea during the Korean War. He left the Army in 1957, having earned the rank of sergeant. Later in his life, Sivola lived in Los Angeles, where he died in 1988. He's buried beside his second wife, Della, and Inglewood Park Cemetery. Please join me for the second part of this podcast, A Tale of Two Dog Tags, Part 2. That will be podcast number 44.